Hello, everyone. My name is 4AS, and if this is the first time you're tuning in, this is the Revolutionary Think Tank Podcast, Episode 7. This is a podcast about revolutionary thinking, protest music, and political commentary. And this is my co-host, Mr. E. Mr. E, how are you going today?
I am well, thank you. 4IS, how are you?
Yeah, I'm going pretty good. And you've probably noticed the topic of today, so the socialist state. I thought what would be a good idea to kind of discuss today is, well, a lot of people talk about, the revolution and, seizing the means of production and the workers taking control of the state, but not much is actually talked about afterwards.
Hmm, hmm. So you're like in the sense that it's all the exciting stuff that's talked about first, the struggle, the progression, and then the takeover. But then after that, it's kind of like, well, what do we do now? Like there's less discussion, or there's a less of an idea about that, because it's obviously mostly hypothetical. There's only a very few amount of people, I would say, that have actually taken a revolution from just an idea or a struggle to actually seizing some type of power and then seeing it out for an extended period of time. So there's not a lot of, I guess, an understanding of what happens after the initial stages of a revolution. So it is a very hard question, I kind of guess, to grapple with, because it's completely hypothetical, almost, after a certain point.
Yeah, because I definitely want to discuss, because obviously, when you do have a revolution, you have the old status quo. So this is basically the capitalism, or the people that run the state, whether that be, you have your ruling class, basically the judges of the court, the police that are kind of enforcing the will of the courts and parliament. That's basically what you consider your status quo. And then you have a possible revolutionary party that has the masses behind them. And basically, when you do have, during a revolution, this kind of jockeying of power, that's actually known as the dual power. So this idea of the struggle between the status quo and the revolutionary party and the masses. And yeah, I basically want to discuss today, say, for example, if Australia was thrown into this scenario, what would we consider a good socialist state? And, maybe just have a discussion about that. Because you do kind of get an influence, like an idea and an influence from the various ideologies like anarchism and Marxism, as to what is a good socialist state.
Right.
And I think it would be good for the listeners and the viewers to see, like, what are our thoughts? What are these ideas? Let's discuss them.
Yeah, so this is a very uniquely, well, obviously in the title, but very uniquely socialist take on the revolution, and then what happens after the initial takeover. So you have that exciting struggle, you have that takeover of the state apparatus, so the bureaucracy, all the levels of administration and running and controlling of society, as you discussed before, your law and order. So your court systems, your police force that physically enforce and regulate, and then your administrative functions like your government buildings, organizations and agencies that run the day-to-day workings of a nation, of a country, of a society. And then you have your political apparatus as well. In most modern countries, or in places of the world today, you have a parliamentary structure, two houses full of elected representatives, which are picked from the people for a period of time. So that's what we're really drilling down to today, is after those two sections of society are seized by this revolutionary party, the masses, the working class, whatever you want to call it, what happens next? What is it that they need to achieve to perpetuate and keep the revolution alive? I think that's basically what we're drilling down to today, right? That's what the question is of essence.
Well, yeah, because really Marx, especially in the Communist Manifesto, he does talk about in the latter stages of it, this idea of the withering of the state. And what at least is talked about there is, well, that's the whole point of communism, is to eventually get to a state in like a socialist state, or a basically a post-capitalist world where everyone lives in communes, or at least lives in a state, basically a stateless society. And that's basically the concept behind like the withering of the state, is that status quo that used to happen, that's not needed anymore. And that's where the whole idea of to each according to their needs, to each according to their own. I think I'm paraphrasing that, but those sort of ideas, that's basically, he describes the end goal. Yeah. But what is that ground zero day? So we've seized the means of the production to the withering of the state. What happens in the middle bit?
What's in the middle part? Yeah. Like that funny South Park joke with the underpants gnomes.
Yes.
Yes. So the famous kind of communist understanding of how society should be structured in its perfect communist kind of society is from each according to their ability, to each according to their need.
I thought I was misquoting that.
That's the essence of kind of the ideal communist society, people living in a communal arrangement where there's an abundance of goods thanks to technological advances and I guess the contribution of everyone working in a social manner as opposed to with a capitalistic mindset. And so everyone produces more than really what is necessary, and people are able just to survive kind of off that system, and they can come and go as they please in a sense. They take what they need and they contribute what they like to, because they're not forced to do anything. So then the question comes down to, in that phrase that I last used there, is force. And so that is the main question, I guess, of today. We must grapple with this question first before we can go anywhere further, is what is the state? Now you danced around this idea of the status quo and like all this sort of stuff. So the state, in essence, in socialist theory, let's call it, is an apparatus of the ruling class in any given type of society that helps them maintain, or first we could say establish, and then maintain their power through physical force, or not even just physical, it could be through some type of indoctrination, whether it be through like religion or education system or political ideals or a judicial system, what have you. The state is the apparatus, the way of oppressing or controlling the lower class. And usually, in all societies, the upper class is smaller than the lower class. So you have a few which having to rule a mass of people. And when you have a handful of people ruling over a huge majority of people, the only way that a few people can stay in power over a larger group is by some form of coercion. Where, like I said before, whether that's physical or mental coercion, whatever, that is what the state is responsible for. There's this very romantic kind of understanding of what the state is nowadays. It's like, it's just like this administrative thing. It just makes sure everything runs fine. Okay, that's fine. Yes, there is that to a certain degree. The state is definitely an administrative tool, an accounting tool that makes sure things function properly and stuff like that. But its primary purpose is to ensure that the class kind of relations in a society, those who call the shots and make the decisions, are given the power to do such in a formal structure. And that reinforces and establishes the ruling class over the masses. And usually, like, one of the biggest things that we think of when we think of the state, and I haven't even touched on this yet, is things like the military.
Yeah.
That's what the state's there for. That's why you have a ruling class on top that is calling the shots, because they do need some type of armed force in order to, hopefully, as a last resort, make sure by enforcing things physically that the masses stay in line and do what they should be doing so the ruling class can continue ruling. So I think it's important for us then to establish, really what the state is in the context of some type of socialist revolution, because the state seems to be the big enemy in that sense, or the big problem.
Well, okay, you could probably look at it in these kind of two distinctions, is that the state, at least nowadays, or the status quo that I was kind of referring to before, is made up of one aspect of it as an ideology, and then two as a state of like a distribution. So the state, or at least the status quo that we see of now, is capitalism. So that's the idea of, basically the way things are run is through the idea of capital. So your businesses, in accounting terms, you can't have a business without equity. So those kind of individuals or companies that invest in it in order to make it run. And so that as an ideology, and then as a distribution is the idea of the free market. So, hey, I go to markets and that orange is $1. The market believes that it's $1. If you're willing to exchange $1 for that orange, that's the free market. Somebody else could undercut me and say do it for 50 cents. That's up to the consumer and the buyer. Whereas, say, for example, if we were to go to the Russian Revolution, and then when Lenin, Trotsky, and Stalin took control afterwards, that ideology for that specific revolution was socialism, and then the distribution was a central economy. So that was the state, or at least the Revolutionary Party, in conjunction with workers' councils, determined, the budgets, determined, hey, how many cars do we actually need? Not let's, have company X, Y, and Z who create cars in perpetuity, like in capitalism. In a central economy for the year, it's you have the Revolutionary Party and the Workers' Councillors working in conjunction to be like, oh, well, we actually need 100 cars for the year. Let's make sure that in terms of the workers in the state, distributing that sort of labor, let's work together as to how much resources do we have to use in order to get to that end goal.
So what you're talking about is a planned economy.
Yeah, pretty much.
So we've transitioned then to the idea of, okay, this is what happens day one after power is seized. Then people need to start thinking about how things are going to be run economically. So you start to plan for an economy.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. And I think that is a very important function of this type of socialist revolution. And then the next stages, what you do basically after seizing power. I think it's very important to sit down and try and think about how things are actually going to be worked out. So society is provided for basically in terms of its needs and its wants. First, in terms of its level of subsistence, how you get people fed, clothed, housed, what have you, and then how you produced goods for them beyond that and are able to supply them with the type of lifestyle that they're basically wanting or seeking. And that's not basically, I guess they're not having to sacrifice too much of their previous lifestyles in order to achieve some type of new society. But I'm assuming yet, if you're going to be going through any type of revolution, there'd be a lot of sacrifice going on in the initial stages, which is historically what has happened, especially in socialist revolutions, the big ones. Anyway, people have to kind of pull together and work together, and they lose some of the luxuries and some of the niceties that they might have enjoyed before, so they can get on top of things and start working towards this planned economy that you were talking about. But I think primarily, though, and I'm sorry to take the conversation in a completely other direction, but I think really, if you look at the history of revolutions going beyond or before socialist-style revolutions, when we look at bourgeois revolutions in themselves, the primary starting point for, okay, let's see what happens day after the revolution, which is usually some type of, then this is where revolution is really confused. But like, let's talk about the power struggle. The day after the power struggle, when the old power is being kicked out and the new revolutionary party takes form, they've got their own, armed guard now, and they've got an army behind them. And the beginnings of this new state apparatus is being formed. They put their own officials in at the heads of their armies and in their own court systems, and at the head of their own police forces, and in their heads of their own education systems, and the heads of their businesses and economies. But they're also sitting down and reimagining or establishing for the first time a constitution. Yeah. That, I think, is a key element. If you were talking about, what do we do next kind of thing, we sit down and we start to figure out what are the rights, the unalienable rights of citizens of our new revolutionary society, and what are the types of rules, the objectives, the laws that we want to see governing the way that life should be worked out. And so that's anything from this planned economy, so how we look at things economically and what we expect of people in terms of working and contributing, to what we expect from people politically as well. We've talked about this sort of stuff before. Do we have something that's actually truly democratic, where people actually get involved in every single decision, and it's a majority rules thing? Everyone goes to a public forum every day, and there's political things on the agenda, and people put their hands up and say yay or nay? Or is it an elected representative system, like in the parliamentary structure, where people vote to get someone to represent them, and they go off to parliament, they make decisions on everyone's behalf? Or is it like a delegate system, which you really like, for IS? So they elect a delegate from their area, and that person then goes into town and votes on their behalf and makes decisions politically, and if they don't like what they're doing, they recall them. So that's, I think, the real establishment or the start of revolutionary society, the formation of constitutions, the things that are going to, unfortunately, this is a very bourgeois, I guess, kind of way of looking at things, but the legality of how a society is going to run, kind of its rules and its code of ethics.
Well, actually, the examples that you were kind of using in the speech that you were kind of giving there, you kind of actually touch on a lot of anarchist elements and also a lot of Marxist elements. And I feel like before we continue to talk about this idea of what a new socialist state would be, we kind of need to go over those two ideologies first.
Hmm.
And I guess,
Monumental task there for IS.
yeah, and I guess just to kind of touch on it first, I guess Marxism is what they would also refer to it as scientific socialism. So you kind of have the ideas of its main things was about critiquing capitalism. And if we were to use, because it's technically Leninism, but just for argument's sake, let's just use basically the successful Russian Revolution that happened. And that idea of Marxism is the idea of you have a vanguard party, so a revolutionary party that we were talking about here, and they basically lead the masses through the revolution. And then when the power is basically gotten on behalf of the masses, they work with the socialist councils, or they work with the workers' councils and establish a new state, and eventually they hand off that power to the workers' councils. Now, that's obviously opposed to anarchism. So if you're listening to this podcast for the first time, anarchism is not just complete chaos. Anarchism is the idea of, well, I guess a socialist ideology that is very much focused on individualism, but also if there is going to be a state structure and if there is going to be, I guess, social structures within society, they have to be completely justified. Because if they are not completely justified, then they must be torn down or at least dismantled. And those are the two competing ideas. That's the reason why in the internationals that have happened throughout the years, you've had Karl Marx versus Michael Bakunin. You've had, I can't remember if Kautsky was a anarchist.
Look, he was a Marxist.
Oh, he was a Marxist.
Yeah. Like he was a reformist, as Lenin would describe him.
Right.
And so he was, labeled and blacklisted a bourgeois reformist. So I don't believe he was an anarchist.
Okay, well, the big fighting one was definitely Bakunin versus Marx, and
that's the big struggle that everyone remembers. And Bakunin himself described it, like particularly in the First International. If we're going to go down this idea of Marxists versus anarchists, he described it as, because the end goal is communism, like we talked about before, right? This pure communist way of living, where everyone is accounted for and provided for and such. He put it down to the idea of authoritarian communism or state communism versus anti-state or anti-authoritarian communism. And those are the differences, I guess, in a really brief way of talking. That's the difference between Marxism or Marxists and anarchists. Is they're both socialists or social libertarians.
Yes.
More anarchists, I would say, social libertarians, but let's just call them both socialists. But there is a state use by Marxists, and there is a anti-state sentiment by anarchists. Like you said, the anarchists, I guess you would say, they would support hierarchies only where they're justifiable and achieve some type of specific ends in and of themselves, but they don't exist just for the sake of existing. So if they are to get you from A to B and to establish an anarchist society or part of an anarchist movement or part of an anarchist structure somehow to try and achieve that end goal of communism, then fine, they'll take it for a little bit and then they'll quickly dismantle it and get rid of it as soon as they can because they don't like the domination of people over others. even if like it seems okay or justifiable, they're still not comfortable with it at the end of the day. And they try to veer away from having any type of domination of people over people at all. The Marxists, on the other hand, and, I think Marx said it himself kind of thing, or Engels does, they recognize fully that in class societies, which is what we have throughout human history, you do have the existence of the state. And we talked about the state before. The state is a tool of ruling class oppression. Whether you think it's justified or not, that's what the state does or is. It's a toolbox, if you will, with different things you can take out of it to oppress a group of people, usually a bigger group of people. And so Marxists would say, in order to achieve that end goal of communism, you need to actually adopt the state. The workers' parties, the proletariat, the masses, what have you, they should be, because of their class consciousness, their understanding of the fact that they are being oppressed, and there's more of them, they should rise up then, assume the state as their own, and use that as an oppressive tool to subject and keep down the bourgeoisie, their original rulers, and make sure that they are suppressed and they do not rise again because they're taking hold of the state and using it for themselves and their own interests. And once they're sufficiently suppressed and they're not going to come out again, and working class society has been in power for long enough with its class consciousness and its understanding that it can make a socialized world, that planned economy you were talking about before, at that point, the state will wither away and you won't need a tool of oppression anymore, because everyone will just be kind of living in this socialized kind of communal way of life, as opposed to a competitive free market capitalist style of living. And so those are the two approaches that are constantly doing battle, like, hey, we're better than you, or we've got this understanding here. But they both come to that same end goal. It's just like that discussion of like how we get there. And the key question is, why we really talked about this before, is the use of the state. What do you do with it?
Now, this is the whole reason why I brought up anarchism and Marxism, because this is fundamentally my pitch. Now, do you know of the saying, an iron fist in a velvet glove, Mr. A?
I do not. Could you please dive on?
This is like a phrase of kind of when you're describing a party of people, or you could be describing an individual, that they come across as gentle and kind, but really when you actually analyze their actions, they're very forthcoming and they're very assertive and they're like to the point and that sort of thing. So the reason why I bring up that imagery is, I think for an Australian context, we're very much in a Western culture, we're very much used to individualism. We're very much used to the idea of, we're also used to these sort of collective ideas like mateship and that sort of, and like coming together in that sort of way. And I think the best way to at least market a socialist state would be to have a Marxist fist in an anarchist glove. So the reason why I'm saying that is, a lot of systems have like a top-down view. And I think in order to have a Marxist way of viewing things, so you're having a revolutionary party and you're having workers' councils, I think the best way to at least sell that structure after day zero, when the revolution has been successful, is to emphasize the workers' councils. So, at least in the Australian context, I'm obviously making a whole bunch of assumptions here, but I'm going to assume that the trade union structure is in place as it is. And just say, for example, we have various masses within the society that are not working people. So say, for example, we have elderly or we have children. Maybe you can have also like neighborhood councils where those people's those various ages are catered for. But effectively what you have is you have workers councils, trade unions slash neighborhood watches, let's say, who basically people are encouraged in an anarchist way that this is the way things are decided in society, and also this is how you get politically engaged. You go to your local council, whether that be weekly meetings or monthly meetings, where you go for an agenda, and that's where you have the idea, as you were talking before, you eventually have delegates that represent those councils, and they go over to the Revolutionary Party, and you basically have this back and forth in terms of debating, where the party is going to do what the councils want, and basically the councils are not afraid to say what they want because the party should represent them. So I think it's realistic the way things are politically is you can keep a federal parliament, if you will, which is the Revolutionary Party. You can keep the local councils, which are effectively the workers' councils and the neighborhood watches. But I think what you can wither away straight away is probably any sort of middle bureaucracy, like, states, for example. Again, I'm making a whole bunch of assumptions, but if you are able to get people more politically engaged, which I'm thinking if the revolution is successful, that you most likely are getting people more engaged, but you basically reinforce a bottom-up structure where individualism is emphasized, people's political engagement is emphasized, and you keep the communication up between the Federal Revolutionary Party and the local workers' councils and neighborhood watches, and you keep up that communication. And I'm just going to make a further assumption that anything that the states would have been in charge of, say hospitals or that sort of thing, basically all the councils, maybe they set up trusts that take care of the hospitals that are in a general area, and you kind of take care of that. So that might be a rushed pitch of what I propose, but I think that marketing is just as important as probably the Marxist vision of having the dual power between the workers' councils and the Revolutionary Party.
But the iron fist and a velvet glove kind of thing is, in a sense, that you do have a strong, you do have an authoritarian drive, but you have it also working on the outside or in conjunction with a freely formed and flexible, if you will, council system, which is full of community and local representation. So you have a centralized party structure or a parliament, like you said before, or something at the federal level, but that federation is made up of individual local institutions.
That's where your delegates come. That's where your delegates come in as well.
But so the delegates feed into the party structure, or the party structure is separate, and the delegates meet and they work kind of like you have a dual power system like you were explaining before. So the velvet glove is that dual power that sits alongside the federal level authoritarian body that kind of just works on its own agenda and drives forward, but it is still it exists in like a kind of has a coexistence with a bunch of local institutions that actually have recallable delegates that are fed from local levels throughout the nation or the country.
You know what? I'm happy to clarify that basically that there almost should be a 50-50, like in terms of the Revolutionary Party and the workers' councils and the neighborhood watches, because fundamentally the people that are going to be part of the Revolutionary Party are fundamentally delegates from the councils and the councils and the neighborhood watches. Because sure, the people that were part of the Revolutionary Party were, the intelligentsia that led the masses onto the revolution. Mm. But just because they were the intelligent doesn't necessarily mean that they deserve more of a say in how the society runs compared to the masses.
So you have a party, the party, right? And they are more technocratic in the sense that they're the technical experts when it comes to revolution and the comings and goings or the functionings of a society. So your high-level bureaucrats, your revolutionary, your revolutionary experts and stuff like that, and they sit in a party that coexists and shares and has co-power with actually democratically or elected and chosen persons from across the country or across this nation, full of various local and local communities and stuff like that. So you have them working together, but you have one that is more kind of technocratic. They're experts in their field, and you have others that are actually chosen by the people. So you have them too. Is that what you mean, or you actually mean that the party is chosen from the delegates, is chosen from the elected persons, and it forms like a cabinet, if you will. So like the elected persons then will elect people from within themselves to then form the party, and the party makes decisions, but it can't just do it alone. It needs to work, I guess, with that association of delegates from all over the country.
Basically the latter, that I'm kind of assuming that the Revolutionary Party that basically got in power in the first place, I'm assuming that they have the ear of the people, that they already had important revolutionary ideas,
right.
That when they do go pitch it to the workers' councils, the workers' council is going to go, great, Leader X, aren't those ideas fantastic? You can be a delegate of ours. And I'm assuming their right-hand man also has brilliant ideas. Great, you can be a delegate of ours as well. But ultimately, those delegates are beholden to the workers' parties and the neighborhood watches.
Yeah.
That basically there's eventually there becomes a symbiotic relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, interesting. Very interesting way. Like Bakunin in some of his works actually describes what he thinks would be an anarchist society and like how it would actually function. And he talks about confederations. So a federation, I'm led to believe, a federation is kind of like they're joining together of various components. Like in Australia, you have a federal government because it is the government that oversees the functions of all of the states combined. But a federation is not something that you can opt out of. or secede from.
Mm.
A confederation, in true anarchist spirit and in the spirit of individual freedom, a confederation is when you join something, but if you don't like it at any time, you can say, I'm out, like that kind of thing.
Right.
And so he talks about having this kind of society where you have communities, or at the local level. So let's use, local council or local government area as an example, as the kind of most grassroots organization of people. And those local governments local government areas have their own council and their delegates, and people send delegates to look after the comings and goings of that local community. And then communities will then combine in different regions to make confederations of different regions. And then they all come together and decide what's best for their region. And then those regions will confederate into a larger kind of national body that looks after the comings and goings of that entire nation. And so you have these levels of confederations that keep going up until they get to the national scale. But all the time, they are that style of delegate representatives. And so they're not elected representatives like in a parliamentary structure where they get a term and they're untouchable, the delegates. So they can be recalled from their positions at any time at the behest of the regional community, the local community, what have you, if they're not doing their job. Okay. So he talks about that as this anarchist style societal structure and way of organizing things on a larger scale, which is what you have in the modern world with nation states and what have you, which I think would be very different to the Marxist style, which we talked about before, which is where they just seize the state through a workers' party or a proletarian kind of mass, and then they try and figure out en masse how to run that state, and I guess how to do things from there. They assume the existing skeleton or framework, and they use it and employ it to their benefit and adapt it where is necessary. So the proletariat class, the workers' class, stays on the top of that pyramid and calls the shots until society is ready to become communal or communist or properly communist. So I guess those are two ways which kind of sit in between what you were talking about, actually, where you have people assuming this function of the state and people that are using this kind of delegate and representational system, but you have them sitting kind of, in symbiosis, as you were saying, and working together to try and administer and look after the comings and the goings of the society, which is interesting. It's an interesting concept. I'll give you that. I'm still unclear about how the velvet glove fits over the iron fist in a way. Is the iron fist because they're actually really driving some dogmatic ideas to get people over the line, which only an authoritarian person could do, or authoritarianists could do, as opposed to, and then you have this kind of this lighter anarchist kind of system that sits just beside it, so people feel like it's not too bad having those crazy authoritarians there.
Well, at least I'm assuming that that the workers' councils and the neighborhood watches are giving a certain amount of power to their delegates federally to make the laws and do what is necessary. So that's where the Marxist fist is coming from. And I think coming from the status quo that we know, you're at least showing those individualistic qualities that the workers' councils and at least the local councils, they do have a say, and then ultimately they do have the veto ability to pull back the um, the delegates,
Mm.
but I guess their scope of what they could do is probably limited to what the Revolutionary Party can do. So that's where the Marxist fist and of a anarchist glove comes from, is
Yeah.
that their scope is a lot less because they can obviously do things locally and they can do things in terms of veto power, but in
Mm.
terms of how the planned economy and how the actual country and socialist state works, that's left up to the Revolutionary Party, often the big capital state.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
But from what you were mentioning before, it sounded like I was almost suggesting a hybrid system of
Yes. Yes. Bit of hybridism, I
yes,
think they call it, which is an interesting concept, and I think that's something that you're acquainted with somewhat. Um, and I think that is really the essence of the working class movement since the First International, and you know when they all got together to try and figure out what the next steps were going to be in terms of working class um, liberation, and how to end the oppression that the masses of people have been living under, especially since the start of the capitalist system. Um, there was two sides of the argument. Hey, no, let's do it this way. No, let's do it this way. And they're pulling for an authoritarian style and anti-state style. And like, how do they come together? And that's what I think hybridism, or what you were talking about, tries to do. It tries to reconcile the two opposing factors. It's just like, that girl in the taco commercials. Why can't you have both? Like,
yeah, yeah.
there is two sides of, there's always two sides to the story kind of thing. And I think it's very kind of dialectical to have two opposing forces that are just like, pulling at each other and circulating, and there's this motion, and there's not one side that really dominates over the other. They both have their good points and their I guess you could say their downsides. So you need to kind of come together to try and figure out something that sits kind of in the middle of it all, and gives that balanced approach to what's happening. And whether that be, I think, through the structures that we were talking about, through political structures and like local or representatives from communities, or through the actual trade unions, like you were talking about, like some anarchist styles work on the idea of syndicalists, which are like, they don't actually deal in political structures and communities and stuff like that. The way they work is that it is trade unions. So the heads of each industry, those bodies that look after, I guess, all of the workers in those industries, are the ones that will assume the functions of looking after society. All the various industries out there will come together. If they're service industries or productive industries, whatever, they have their own unions, and the trade unions in those particular areas are the ones that will make the decisions, because everyone kind of goes to work and they have to work. So why not that be the political apparatus instead of this representational government kind of stuff? Let's all just vote at work, and then you can vote for people that you like through your place of work and employment, and those people will make the calls about what to do in terms of the planned economy. So, like, there's that way as well. So you could have like a three powered system where you have a kind of a workers or a revolutionary party, and then a group of I guess representatives from the local or communal level, and then you could have representatives from industry and business.
Right. Yeah.
And they could all share power amongst themselves. They all come up with ideas and decisions, and they all have to vote amongst themselves as to which way society should be run. It's not unusual then to have, it's just like a parliamentary system where you have two houses, you just throw a third in there for good measure. So, these are all ways, I guess, of organizing society, and it's why, because it was a monumental task. The question of today's podcast. I think we've grappled with it well. But this is a conversation that is definitely going to be ongoing, I think, for IS.
Oh,
Definitely.
100%. And hey, I gave my pitch today. It seems it was a bit more hybridist than I thought. But hey, it was a nice talk today, Mr. E, because I originally thought that it was more Marxist and that I was flavoring it with anarchism. But if it's more of a 50-50, then today's talk was good to kind of find that out. And hey, if maybe we might be able to do a part two if maybe you put on your thinking cap and maybe you can come up with a socialist state idea.
I'll take you up on that. We might need a part 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 as well then.
Okay. Well, we'll take one baby step at a time. So maybe we can aim for part 2 at some point.
Sounds good.
And just to kind of finish things off, you've probably noticed the image in the back, the synthwave art. I'll let you know that the prompt was the struggle of the workers' councils. So you probably see the figure in the background that's kind of leaning over the skyscraper. And that's basically what the synthwave art thought was a struggle. It's what the AI thought. And I guess with that, guys, that's today's podcast episode. We hope you enjoyed it. Remember to keep thinking and keep learning. And over to you, Mr. E.
Thank you for IS. And to all you out there, please remember, I am, you are, we are a mystery.